Why I joined the military in a time of war. Today on The Combat Perspective. Thanks for joining me today on The Combat Perspective. Today I want to discuss why I joined the military in a time of war. So it really goes back to when I was a child. Um, my father always talked about his time in the military. So my family started the military, as far as I know, back in World War II. My great grandfather was in the Army Air Corps. My grandfather, on my father's side, lied about his age at 16 or 17, joined the Marines and fought in Korea. He was wounded in Korea. I believe he was shot at least once. And when he got back from Korea, they found out his age, and he was actually kicked out of the Marine Corps for lying about his age at the beginning. On my mother's side, my grandfather was in the Navy. And then my father was in, and he was in the infantry as well. So growing up, he always told me these amazing stories about his time in the military. And as a 7, 8, 9-year-old boy, hearing your dad talk about his time camping in the woods with his friends, talking about how they would play war games, always just fascinated me. So my father, his first duty station was in Germany. He didn't talk about Germany a whole lot, just about how cold it was and what they did. But he was stationed at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, with the 101st Airborne. And this is kind of pretty much where all his stories came from. And he would tell us stories about how he would be in the field like 180 days out of the year. And we never went camping as kids because my dad hated sleeping outside so much. He said that he was just always out there, so he didn't want to go sleep in a tent when he was out of the military. My dad was in the military in the 1980s, so if you think about it, most of his higher command were likely in Vietnam. He would tell us stories about how they would be in the helicopters, the Black Hawks, and the pilots were all Vietnam vets, and they would skirt the trees almost everywhere that they're going, and he would always be sitting out of the Black Hawk with his feet hanging down, and he could almost touch the tops of the trees with his feet. So those kind of stories just fascinated me, and as a boy, it makes you want to do it as well. Also, he talked about playing war games and how they would always play war games. And some of the stories that I still remember is every once in a while when he would get captured, he would be taken to the enemy's camp. And of course, this is during peacetime, so the enemy was actually just either different units or someone in TRADOC. So he would get captured, and he told us about his friend who was claustrophobic, and they would put him in a small little locker and bury him in the ground, and what my dad would have to do, and those stories were just awesome, right? And if anyone has kids, those are the stories you would want to tell kids, right? And that planted this seed in my head to join the military. It wasn't, and I'll get to this part in the story later, but it wasn't till I joined the Army and was done with basic training that he started telling me about the bad experiences. And I really wish he would have told me about some of those before I made the decision. Another big factor in me joining the military was obviously September 11th. So September 11th, 2001, we all know, was the attack on the World Trade Center, the Pentagon. And so I was a freshman in high school during that time frame. I still remember what class I was in and the announcement that came over the PA system. And I thought, well, if I'm going to join and if I'm serious about this is probably the time that the country needs me the most. I'm not sure if I would have joined if September 11th wouldn't have happened. I was, just a freshman in high school, so I'd probably have quite a few years to decide that. But being available for your country and fighting in a war zone to defend your country was definitely, I guess, appealing to me, and I'll get to that too. And then there's always my wife, Brooke. We were semi-dating at the time, as teenagers would do. I met my wife when I was 11 or 12. I think we first started officially going out when I was 12, and it was always on again, off again type relationship like most teenagers have. But I still consider her pretty much my only girlfriend that I've ever had. But a lot of my decision to join the military was to impress her, which I don't think did, because she said I was pretty much dumb and crazy to do. But that just egged me on a little bit more to do it. And then there's the pride side of me, I guess, is it always sounded awesome to be considered like a war hero or someone who fought in a war. As crazy as that sounds, and I'm sure a lot of people could relate to that. So during that time frame, being available in a time of war, fighting in a war, it's less than 1% of the population is able to do something like that. And then so I joined up when I was 16 turning 17, so my parents had to sign a waiver for me to actually join up. And my brother already was enlisted and joined the Army, so I do have another brother that is still currently in the Army. He's probably on year 17 or so. And so with him joining the Army, when we went to his basic training, graduation, he went to Relaxin' Jackson. He was, 31 Whiskey, I believe, a communications person. Seeing all those guys in their really ugly green uniforms and those old hats that they used to wear, those green, like, pointed hats. I'm lucky we switched to berets by the time I joined. But, seeing all of them that I thought was, like, super awesome. That pushed me more to do it, and I was signed up, ready to go. My brother convinced me to do what he did. He said, "Oh, bro, you would love it. Communications, you learn about computers, you get to work on all this equipment." And in the back of my mind, I didn't want to do that, but I'm like, well, if my brother doesn't and he thinks I would like it, well, maybe he knows more than I do. So when I first went to the MEP station and signed my contract, it was also for communications. And the more I thought about it, and the weeks went on, getting closer to leaving, the more I just didn't think that was for me. And so I called up my recruiter and said, "Hey, I do not want to do this communications job." And, he talked to me about it, and he's like, "Well, what do you want to do?" I'm like, "Well, I want to be in the infantry." And his eyes light up, because by then, it's probably, what year is it? 2014, the start of the wars. Iraq is, in its ramp up stage, and their quotas, I'm sure they had a lot that they had to hit infantry. And so his eyes light up, and he's like, "Oh yeah, okay, we could do that." And he's like, "How long you want to join? 2 years?" I believe my first enlistment was for 2 years for the communications. And I said, "No, let's do the full 5. And his eyes light up even more, hitting that quota, right? And so we go to the MEPS, and we change the paperwork. We do the infantry, and I felt pretty confident about that. So we're going to talk about basic training in another video, but I do want to jump after basic training and then talk about the conversations that I had with my dad. And this is when he started telling me about the negative things about the military that I really wish he would have told me prior to. Okay, so imagine you've been listening to all these awesome stories about camping, shooting guns, blowing things up, playing war games, someone that you idealize and that, your dad, tells you all about, right? And so what happens is after basic training, he's like, okay, well, you're going to be going to Germany. Germany is really cool. I've been to Germany, it's cold there. You're going to have a lot of fun. But here's what I don't like, right? You're constantly awake. You're on guard duty. You're freezing. You have bad leadership sometimes. All these people, it could be a bad environment with all the different types of people, the different cultures that are there. I didn't like my squad leaders. Some of my squad leaders would always yell. I wasn't treated the best all the time. I would get stuck on these details. I was a supply sergeant for the company. Every once in a while, I'm like, Dad, come on, man. You couldn't tell me about this before I signed the paperwork and decided to join. And he's like, no, it's a great experience, but there's just a lot of things I didn't like about it. And I had to find that out for myself. And once again, I don't know if that would have swayed me. I did want to continue the lineage, though, of being in the infantry. As far as I know, going back, I'm the third generation in the infantry. So my grandfather was in the infantry in Korea. My father was in the infantry. Didn't deploy, didn't do anything combat related, and then I joined, right? My brother did redeem himself, though. He decided that he didn't want to stay in camo, or he didn't want to stay in just the regular army. If he was in the infantry, maybe his mind would have changed, but he got tapped to do recruiter pretty quick, and so he put in his packet for selection, and he's actually in the special operations now. So good for him. He should have joined the infantry right away, though. I still give him a hard time about that. And then, yeah. So that's pretty much why I joined in a time of war. It boiled down to the sense of duty, carrying on the family tradition, redeeming the family tradition since my brother wasn't going to be in the infantry, so I had to do it and rub that in his face a little bit. And then also to impress the girl, right? That's probably why a lot of guys do join as well. They say in the infantry there's, less than 1% of the population is able to do like the stuff that we do or does join the infantry. And that always was a cool statistic for me. And then if you break it down even further, how many of them are combat veterans or multiple deployment veterans. And so that's one of the reasons why I joined and during the time of war. Do I regret it? Absolutely not. I'd go back in a heartbeat, tell my wife that all the time. But I wouldn't change anything that happened as well. With me getting out of the military, everything works together for the best. It seems that everything. It took me a while to get stable again, let's say, but that's going to be the wrap for this episode. Once again, I enjoy talking about these experiences. I plan to do it a few times a week, hopefully, and we'll catch you next time. Once again, thank you for joining me on The Combat Perspective.
Let's see it.